I grew up in a small town where the idea of entrepreneurship was as foreign as the concept of living in a big city. My parents, hardworking but cautious, always instilled in me the value of job security. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom was a school teacher. They were content, and I was raised to be content too. But deep down, I always felt this gnawing feeling that I wanted something more. I wanted to do something bigger than the 9-to-5 grind. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew I couldn't ignore that urge to break free from the ordinary. Fast forward to college, where I studied business and finance. It wasn't the most exciting field, but it seemed like the logical thing to do, especially considering my parents' focus on practicality. I graduated with honors and landed a decent job in a financial consulting firm right out of college. I remember being so proud of myself for having made it. My friends and family congratulated me, and it felt good. But the deeper I got into the corporate world, the more suffocating it became. I had long hours, a good salary, and a respectable title, but I wasn't fulfilled. Then, one day, something happened. A friend of mine started talking about an online business he had begun. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he had this energy about him that intrigued me. He wasn't working for a boss. He wasn't bound by a cubicle or a rigid schedule. He had his own business, and that thought blew my mind. He explained how he was selling products through an e-commerce platform and how it was slowly growing. He told me that all it took was research, a little creativity, and a willingness to take risks. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I started researching online business opportunities. I watched countless YouTube videos, read blog posts, and joined forums. Everything pointed to e-commerce, specifically dropshipping. The more I learned, the more I realized this could be my ticket out of the corporate grind. I could run my own business, make my own decisions, and, most importantly, create something from scratch. I could work for myself. But here's the thing. I didn't have a lot of money to invest. I couldn't just quit my job and start a full-fledged e-commerce business. I had bills to pay, a car loan, and a mortgage that was barely manageable on my corporate salary. But I was determined. I started small. I began by saving a portion of my paycheck every month and invested that into setting up a website. I chose a niche that I was passionate about: eco-friendly products. It was a field that had been growing in popularity, and I believed I could make a real impact. I remember the first product I sold. It was a bamboo toothbrush. I had ordered a sample from a supplier, took some photos of it, and set up a simple Shopify store. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I launched the website and then sat there, waiting for a sale. Days went by, and nothing happened. The first week, I felt a little defeated. I had put money into ads, set up an Instagram page, and created a few blog posts, but nothing. It was crushing. I had convinced myself that if I just built it, the sales would come, but that wasn't the case. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I learned everything I could about digital marketing, Facebook ads, and Instagram influencers. I hired a freelance designer to create better product images and worked on my website to make it more user-friendly. Slowly, traffic began to pick up, and I made my first sale. It wasn't much, a $20 toothbrush, but to me, it was proof that this could work. I was ecstatic. I couldn't believe someone, a complete stranger, had bought something I had created. From that moment on, things started to snowball. My sales increased steadily, and I reinvested every dollar I made back into the business. I expanded my product line, added more eco-friendly items, and refined my marketing strategies. Within 6 months, I was making more money from my e-commerce store than I was from my day job. But I was still hesitant. I didn't want to quit my job yet. The safety net of a steady paycheck kept me anchored, even though I hated the idea of staying in a corporate job that I had outgrown. Eventually, the inevitable happened. The business kept growing. I was working late into the night, answering customer emails, processing orders, and trying to stay on top of everything. One day, I realized that my corporate job was no longer fulfilling, and it was draining my energy. I had reached a point where my side hustle was no longer just a hobby, it was becoming a full-time business. So, after much deliberation, I made the jump. I quit my job. I remember telling my boss, and he gave me the same advice that everyone else did. Are you sure you want to leave this job? You've got security here. But I knew it was the right time. It felt like I was walking away from something that had always been safe, but I was stepping into something that I believed could change my life. The transition wasn't easy. There were challenges I hadn't anticipated, like scaling the business and dealing with the complexities of customer service. But I pushed through, hired a small team to help, and continued to grow my brand. Over time, I transitioned from a dropshipping model to holding inventory, which allowed me to offer faster shipping and more control over my products. I learned how to build partnerships with influencers, manage customer retention, and create a brand that resonated with people. A year after quitting my job, I hit a major milestone. I reached 6 figures in revenue. It was surreal. I had gone from a guy in a small town with a steady job to an entrepreneur running a business that allowed me to live on my own terms. I was able to quit my day job, travel the world, and even give back to causes I cared about, like environmental conservation. Now, looking back, I see how much has changed. That first sale, that $20 bamboo toothbrush, was the spark that ignited everything. If I had given up when things were slow, I never would have gotten to this point. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, and the road was never straight. There were many sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and setbacks. But in the end, it was all worth it. I can't promise that every story will end like mine. Not every business is destined for success, and not every idea will work. But I can say this: if you have a passion, if you're willing to learn, and if you're ready to take risks, you can build something great. Entrepreneurship isn't about luck. It's about perseverance, adaptability, and taking that first step, no matter how small it may seem. If you're on the fence about starting something of your own, I encourage you to take that leap. You don't need a perfect plan or a huge investment to get started. You just need the courage to try. The journey isn't easy, but it's incredibly rewarding. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. It all started in the most unexpected way. I didn't have a trust fund, a background in tech, or some grand idea. I was just a guy working a 9-to-5 job, trying to pay rent and avoid getting stuck in the grind. But that's how life tends to go, doesn't it? You get comfortable, then something small, almost insignificant, happens, and your whole world gets turned upside down. I had been working at a marketing agency for about 3 years, handling the digital strategy for a variety of clients. My boss, a guy named Mark, was great, supportive, and laid back. He was always the first to praise me when I did something right, but he wasn't the kind of guy to show any interest in my personal ambitions. I was just another employee to him. We had casual conversations now and then, mostly about the latest trends in digital marketing. But there was one conversation that would change everything. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was in the office, working on a client's campaign when Mark called me into his office. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was the way his eyes looked, a mix of frustration and exhaustion. He motioned for me to sit down and sighed deeply. "Listen, I need to tell you something," he started. "The company's been struggling. We've lost some big clients, and things aren't looking great financially. I'm trying to keep everything together, but I don't know how much longer I can keep things afloat." I remember feeling a wave of panic rush over me. I wasn't worried about my job, at least not immediately, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment for me. Mark continued, talking about the future of the agency and the possible layoffs. But all I could think about was how powerless I felt, stuck in a system that wasn't working anymore. That night, I went home and sat in my small apartment, staring at my laptop. I'd always wanted to do something on my own. I dreamed of starting my own business, but I never knew where to begin. I wasn't a tech genius, and I didn't have a network of rich investors waiting for an opportunity to hand me cash. What I did have, though, was experience. I knew marketing. I had a decent understanding of digital strategies, content creation, and even analytics. And I had an idea. I wanted to create a digital marketing platform specifically for small businesses. I realized that many small businesses struggled with their online presence. They couldn't afford to hire agencies, and most of them didn't have the skills or resources to run effective campaigns on their own. They were lost in the sea of generic advice, cheap DIY tools that didn't deliver, and overwhelming options. I thought, why not create a simple, affordable platform where small businesses could access the digital tools they needed to grow? It was a big idea, maybe even too big for someone like me, but something about it clicked. I had to give it a shot. The next few months were a blur. I spent every free hour I had after work diving into research, learning about website development, and talking to small business owners. I needed to understand their pain points, what tools they wanted but couldn't access, and what they were willing to pay for. I found that most small business owners didn't need a full-fledged marketing agency. They needed a way to streamline their efforts, manage their digital presence, and maybe even get a little guidance without spinning an arm and a leg. In my spare time, I started building the platform. I wasn't a developer, but I could build simple websites, so I used every resource I could find to teach myself the basics of app development. The platform was far from perfect. It was clunky, and the design wasn't sleek, but it was functional. I called it MarketMate. The idea was to give small businesses the tools they needed: simple website builders, social media schedulers, basic SEO tips, and even a way to track ads. After months of development, I was ready. I had built a basic version of the platform and even set up a few social media pages. Now, all I had to do was launch it. But here's where things got tricky. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any investors. I didn't even have a solid marketing plan. But I did have a list of small business owners I had been talking to, people who had expressed interest in what I was building. I sent out emails, built a simple landing page, and offered a launch special, a discounted rate for the first 50 users who signed up. The first few days were rough. I had zero traction. No one was signing up, and I started to question whether I had made a huge mistake. But then, something unexpected happened. A small bakery in my town, one I had reached out to earlier, messaged me on Facebook. They were interested in giving my platform a try. I was ecstatic. I set them up, walked them through everything, and helped them with a basic social media strategy. A week later, they came back to me, saying they had already seen an increase in online orders. They were thrilled. That was the breakthrough I needed. Word of mouth spread, and soon, other small businesses started signing up. I started to refine the platform, adding new features based on feedback. I invested everything I had into improving the user experience. And slowly, very slowly, MarketMate started to gain momentum. A year later, I had quit my day job at the agency. My platform was no longer just a side hustle. It was becoming a real business. The first few months after I quit were chaotic. There were days when I barely had enough cash to cover expenses, but I kept pushing forward. I hired my first employee, a customer support specialist, and eventually, a developer. We began expanding, adding more features, and increasing our marketing efforts. I relied heavily on customer referrals and built a community around MarketMate. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Looking back, I don't know how I managed to push through all the challenges. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when I was burned out, frustrated, and feeling like I was in over my head. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered why I started. I remembered the small business owners who had reached out to me for help and how they trusted me. They believed in MarketMate, and I couldn't let them down. Today, MarketMate is a thriving business. We've expanded to hundreds of small businesses around the country, and I'm finally able to support a team of talented individuals. It's still a work in progress, but I'm proud of how far we've come. I didn't have a master plan. I didn't know everything I needed to succeed. But I took a chance on something I believed in, and now it's paying off in ways I never imagined. So, if you're reading this and you're stuck in a job you hate, or you've got a side hustle that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, just know this: it's possible. If you've got an idea and you're willing to put in the work, things can change. You don't need to have all the answers from day one. Just start. Keep learning. Keep improving. And most importantly, keep pushing forward. You never know where it might take you. I never thought I'd be here, writing this story. In fact, for the longest time, I didn't even think I'd make it out of the 9 to 5 grind. But here I am, the owner of a business I started in my garage with barely a dollar to my name, now running a successful startup that helps small businesses grow online. This is the story of how I went from being a broke, overworked employee to a thriving entrepreneur. It all started about 5 years ago. I had just turned 26, and honestly, I hated my job. I worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized company, doing everything from SEO, content writing, to social media management. The pay wasn't terrible, but it was the soul-sucking nature of the job that got to me. I felt like I was just another cog in the machine, working hard for someone else's dream while mine slowly withered away. I had always wanted to start my own business, but the fear of failure kept me frozen. What if I couldn't make it? What if I ran out of money? What if my idea was terrible? These thoughts clouded my mind every time I tried to think of a way to break free. That's when one night, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I had a conversation with my best friend, Alex, who was also in the same boat. He had been talking about quitting his job and starting a business for months, but he, too, was paralyzed by fear. Man, we keep talking about this, but nothing ever happens. We're just going in circles, I said to him. He looked at me and said something that stuck with me. At the end of the day, the worst that can happen is you fail. And even then, you've learned something. But if you don't try, you'll never know what could have been. That was it. It was the spark I needed. I went home that night, sat at my kitchen table, and started brainstorming ideas. I knew I had experience in digital marketing, so I thought, why not help businesses with their online presence? I didn't have much money to start with, and I wasn't sure how I'd make it work, but I was determined to give it a shot. I spent the next few weeks doing market research, watching free tutorials, reading blogs, and listening to podcasts. I learned everything I could about running an online business and helping small companies grow their digital footprint. I began by offering free consultations to a few local businesses, just to build up a portfolio. I told them that I could help improve their websites, increase their social media presence, and generate more leads. It wasn't glamorous, and I didn't have a fancy office or a big team, but I was hustling. I'd work my full-time job during the day and then spend my nights working on my side business. I didn't have much sleep, but I was determined to make this work. Slowly but surely, I started getting a few paying clients, mostly small businesses that didn't have the resources to hire large agencies. I built their websites, created social media campaigns, and improved their SEO. Word of mouth began to spread, and before I knew it, I had a small but steady stream of clients. The first big turning point came when a local restaurant asked me to help them improve their online ordering system. They were losing a lot of business to competitors with more user-friendly websites. I spent weeks working on their site, redesigning it from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of sleepless nights, but the result was a modern, mobile-friendly site that allowed their customers to order online with ease. Within a few months, the restaurant saw a noticeable increase in orders. They were ecstatic, and I was even more excited. From there, things started picking up. I took a leap of faith and quit my day job to work on my business full-time. It was terrifying at first, but I knew I had to go all in if I wanted to see any real progress. I moved out of my tiny apartment and rented a small office space in a shared co-working hub. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first year was a blur of hard work, trial and error, and constant learning. I made plenty of mistakes, some small, some big, but I never gave up. The real turning point came when I decided to hire my first employee, a graphic designer named Sarah. She was talented and shared my passion for helping small businesses. I remember the first time she walked into my office. I was both excited and nervous. Would she fit into the company culture? Would I be able to afford her salary? But we clicked immediately, and she helped take the business to the next level with her design skills. As the business grew, I hired more people, and we expanded our services to include email marketing, branding, and paid advertising. The next few years were a whirlwind of growth. We took on bigger clients, worked on larger projects, and started getting recognition in the industry. We even received a few awards for our work, which was surreal to me. The company went from being a one-person operation in my garage to a thriving digital marketing agency with a team of 10 full-time employees. We were helping small businesses all over the country, and I felt like I was finally living the dream I had always wanted. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were times when we almost hit rock bottom, like when one of our biggest clients suddenly decided to terminate their contract. That was a rough month, and I remember lying awake at night wondering how we were going to recover. But I learned something valuable during that time. No matter how tough things get, you can always bounce back if you're willing to adapt and keep pushing forward. I've learned so much over the past few years, not just about business, but about myself. The person I am today is not the same person who sat in that miserable office job 5 years ago, dreaming of a way out. I've learned to embrace risk, to fail and learn from those failures, and to keep going even when things get tough. And while I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, I've also achieved things I never thought were possible. Looking back, it feels like a dream. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm proud of how far I've come. I'm grateful for the journey, for the lessons, and for the team that has helped me build this business from the ground up. I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, if you're reading this and wondering whether you should take the leap and start your own business, do it. The worst thing that could happen is that you fail, but the best thing? You'll learn, grow, and maybe even build something that changes your life. Just remember, success doesn't happen overnight. It takes hard work, perseverance, and a willingness to keep going, no matter the odds. If I can do it, so can you. I'll never forget the day my life changed. It all started when I decided to leave my 9-to-5 job in a corporate office where I'd been working for nearly 4 years. I wasn't unhappy, but I knew I was settling. I had always been the type of person who wanted to make something of myself beyond just a paycheck. But something happened when I decided to start my own business. Let me rewind a bit. I was 28 years old, living in a cramped apartment in the heart of a busy city, trying to make ends meet, and for the most part, I had been. But I had this nagging feeling that there had to be more to life than sitting at a desk staring at spreadsheets all day. Don't get me wrong, the corporate world gave me stability and some nice perks, but I felt like I was just one of the many ants working for the queen. I wasn't fulfilled, and no amount of office awards or small promotions could shake the constant longing for something more. The idea for my business started to take shape slowly. I've always been into fitness, lifting weights, running, eating healthy, and one evening while scrolling through Instagram, I noticed something. The same fitness influencers were promoting the same protein powder brands and workout gear, and honestly, most of it seemed overpriced or just not that great. That's when the light bulb went off in my head. Why not create a brand that focuses on quality, transparency, and affordability? A brand that would cater to the average person who wanted to live a healthy lifestyle but didn't have the money to spend on overpriced products. I didn't have any background in business, marketing, or nutrition. All I had was a passion for fitness and the belief that I could do something better. I was lucky enough to have a few friends who were into health and wellness too, so I started asking around, doing some research, and formulating a plan. The first step was creating a name and a logo. I spent hours brainstorming and working with a designer to create something simple yet effective. We landed on the name Fitform, which was meant to convey both fitness and the idea of shaping your form, your body, your health, your life. The next step was figuring out how to source products. I reached out to a few local manufacturers who specialized in health supplements. Most of them turned me away because I was a small startup, and they weren't interested in working with someone who didn't have a significant order volume. It was frustrating, but I wasn't about to give up that easily. I kept reaching out, researching new companies, and eventually found a small manufacturer willing to work with me. I had to commit to a minimum order, which was risky, but I scraped together enough money by cutting back on expenses, borrowing a little from family, and even selling a few personal items I no longer needed. When the first batch of products arrived, I was beyond excited. I had my protein powder, pre-workout supplements, and branded workout gear all ready to go. Now, the real challenge began: marketing. I started by creating a website, which, honestly, was more of a passion project than a business endeavor at first. I knew I needed a social media presence, so I set up Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts for the brand. I was working full-time at my 9-to-5, so everything was happening late at night or on weekends. I was also creating content, posting about fitness tips, healthy recipes, and motivational quotes. I knew I had to build a community, not just sell a product. But no matter how much content I posted, no one was paying attention. I spent weeks on end posting content, but the likes, shares, and comments were dismal. I wasn't getting the traction I'd hoped for, and my bank account was starting to dwindle. I was burned out, questioning if I had made a huge mistake. I remember staying up one night, looking at my empty product shelves, feeling the weight of failure already pressing down on me. But something in me snapped. I wasn't ready to quit. I decided to try something different. Instead of promoting my products directly, I began offering value. I reached out to a few small fitness influencers and offered them free samples in exchange for honest reviews. Some agreed, others didn't, but slowly, the reviews started trickling in. I then created a fitness challenge for my followers, encouraging them to take part and use my products to fuel their workouts. I didn't expect much, but the community interaction was insane. People were tagging me in their stories, sharing their progress, and before I knew it, Fitform had a small but dedicated following. It wasn't easy, though. In those early months, I was juggling my job, running a business, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. My friends would joke that I never had time for anything anymore, and they were right. I was constantly hustling. I spent my days answering customer emails, my nights packing orders, and every free moment I had was spent improving my website and social media presence. But the hard work started paying off. Slowly but surely, sales began to increase. It wasn't anything revolutionary, but it was steady growth. The turning point came when one of my influencer partners posted about my products on their story, and it went viral. Suddenly, I was getting hundreds of messages and orders every day. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. I decided to quit my job to focus on Fitform full-time. The first few months of being a full-time entrepreneur were a whirlwind. I hired a small team to help with customer service and logistics, and we worked tirelessly to keep up with the demand. There were days when I thought I was in over my head, but we kept pushing forward. Today, Fitform is a six-figure business. We're not the biggest fitness brand out there, but we've carved out our niche, and we're steadily growing. It's been a roller coaster ride of late nights, failed attempts, and moments where I wanted to give up. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I built this business from the ground up, and while it wasn't easy, it was worth it. I've learned so much along the way, but one of the biggest lessons is this: the road to success isn't linear. There will be highs and lows, but if you stay persistent and keep working towards your goal, you'll find your way. And most importantly, never be afraid to take that first step, because once you do, everything else will fall into place. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business or making a change, just know that it's possible. It won't be easy, and you'll face plenty of obstacles, but the journey is worth it. Keep going, and don't let fear hold you back. If I can do it, so can you. I was 27 when I first started my company. At the time, I was living in a tiny studio apartment, barely scraping by. I had just left a well-paying job in tech to try my hand at something completely different. I didn't have a business degree, no fancy investors, and no special contacts in the industry. All I had was a burning desire to create something meaningful and the will to make it happen, no matter what. It all started with a simple idea: personalized online fitness plans. I'd always been obsessed with fitness, and I knew there was a growing market for people who wanted tailored workout routines. But most fitness plans were generic. I wanted to bring a level of personalization that would make people feel like the program was built specifically for them, not just some cookie-cutter routine they found on a random website. I began by writing up a business plan. It wasn't anything too formal at first, just a Word document with some bullet points. I researched competitors, figured out what they were doing right, and most importantly, what they were doing wrong. The more I looked into it, the more I realized how much potential there was. The fitness industry was booming, and the shift to online fitness was happening fast. I spent the next few months teaching myself web development. I didn't have the money to hire someone to build the site, so I figured I might as well do it myself. The learning curve was brutal. There were days when I thought I had no idea what I was doing, and I felt like quitting more times than I could count. But every time I was close to giving up, I reminded myself why I started. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life working for someone else, answering to a boss who didn't care about my ideas or ambitions. Once the site was up and running, I started reaching out to potential customers. At first, it was just a few friends and family, but as word spread, I began gaining clients. The process was painfully slow. Every new customer felt like a huge win, but I still wasn't making enough to cover rent, let alone pay myself. I lived off peanut butter sandwiches and coffee, working 12 to 14-hour days, building programs, answering emails, and marketing my services. But I was determined. I knew that if I could get enough testimonials and social proof, I could turn this into something bigger. So I began giving away free plans to a select group of people in exchange for honest feedback. I spent hours tweaking the plans based on their suggestions. It was a tedious process, but it paid off. Slowly, my reputation grew, and so did my customer base. More and more people were signing up for my plans, and I was finally starting to see a small but steady stream of income. I decided to take a leap of faith and hire my first employee. It was terrifying. I'd never managed anyone before, and I didn't have enough money to comfortably pay them. But I knew I couldn't keep doing everything on my own. I needed someone to handle customer support while I focused on growing the business. I found a woman who was passionate about fitness and had experience in the tech industry. She was perfect for the role, and hiring her was one of the best decisions I ever made. As the company grew, I had to learn how to juggle more responsibilities. I started hiring more people, building out the team slowly but surely. Each new hire came with its own set of challenges. I had to learn how to delegate, how to trust my team, and how to manage people who were much more skilled than I was in certain areas. But I loved it. I loved watching the company evolve and seeing how everyone's skills meshed together to create something bigger than any of us. Despite the progress, things weren't always smooth sailing. There were months where I wasn't sure if we'd make enough money to pay everyone. There were times when we had to cut costs, let go of employees, and pivot in ways I hadn't anticipated. We ran into legal issues with copywriting our workout plans, and we had to hire an expensive lawyer to sort everything out. There were nights when I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was in over my head. But I kept pushing forward. I kept focusing on the vision to create a service that genuinely helped people improve their health and fitness. The more I spoke to customers and heard their success stories, the more motivated I became. Slowly, we started to gain traction. Our programs were getting rave reviews, and we began partnering with influencers and fitness experts to help grow the brand. Then, just when things were really starting to take off, the pandemic hit. At first, I thought it would crush us. The entire world was shutting down, gyms were closing, and people were cutting back on discretionary spending. But instead of retreating, we adapted. We shifted our focus to creating home workout plans and nutrition guides that required minimal equipment. The demand for online fitness services exploded during the lockdowns, and we were in the right place at the right time. During this period, the company exploded. Revenue doubled, then tripled, and we quickly went from a small startup with a handful of employees to a mid-sized company with dozens of staff members and thousands of customers. The stress was immense, but the rewards were undeniable. We were helping people in a way that mattered, and it felt incredible. With the newfound success came new challenges. Managing a larger team required me to refine my leadership skills, and scaling the business while maintaining the quality of our service was a constant balancing act. I also had to learn how to manage my own mental health, something I'd neglected for years in my pursuit of success. I started seeing a therapist and realized the importance of setting boundaries and taking breaks. I still have a long way to go, but it's been a vital part of my growth as both a person and a leader. 5 years later, I'm sitting here writing this, reflecting on the journey. Our company is now one of the leading online fitness platforms, with thousands of active clients worldwide. I've expanded into new markets, and we're working on launching an app that will make personalized fitness plans even more accessible to people around the world. We've also started offering corporate wellness programs to help businesses promote health among their employees. I won't lie, it hasn't been easy. There have been countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and massive hurdles along the way. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Success isn't just about the destination. It's about the journey, the lessons you learn, the people you meet, and the growth that happens when you push yourself past your limits. The most important lesson I've learned is that if you're willing to work harder than everyone else and never give up, you can make something happen. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be quick, but it will be worth it in the end. The road to entrepreneurship is never a straight line, and I'm proud of the unpredictable, messy path that got me here. If I could do it, so can you. Keep pushing forward, and one day, you'll look back and see how far you've come. I was 26 when I took the leap. The kind of leap that leaves you with no safety net, no plan B, and nothing but an idea and a dream. It wasn't one of those overnight success stories, nor was it a glamorous journey. In fact, it was one of the hardest, most frustrating, and lonely periods of my life. But looking back, I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. I had always been the type of person who dreamed big. I didn't have an Ivy League degree or a ton of family wealth behind me. I wasn't a tech genius or a marketing wizard. I was just a regular guy with a burning desire to make something of myself. My family wasn't rich, but they were supportive. They believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And that belief kept me going when everything else seemed to fall apart. At 25, I had a steady job working as a junior marketing analyst at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was good at it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. I wanted to create something from the ground up, something that could change the world. But what? That was the big question. One evening, as I sat in my small apartment, scrolling through Instagram and watching a video on the future of e-commerce, the idea hit me. The future was in niche, subscription-based businesses. People were getting tired of the same old from big corporations. They were looking for something more personalized, something that felt special. That's when I realized I could start a subscription box service. But not just any subscription box, one that delivered premium, hand-picked, limited edition items that were impossible to find anywhere else. The idea was simple. People would sign up for a monthly subscription and receive a box filled with exclusive products curated around a theme. I would focus on quality, not quantity. Everything had to be top-notch, something that would excite the customer. But there was one problem. I had no money to start a business. I didn't even know where to begin. But I was determined. I spent the next few months obsessively researching. I read books, listened to podcasts, and watched countless YouTube videos. I learned about business models, logistics, marketing, and everything in between. I discovered that starting a subscription box business could be done on a shoestring budget, as long as I was strategic about it. The first step was creating a brand. I wanted something catchy, something that would stick in people's minds. After brainstorming for weeks, I finally came up with the name, Boxed Brilliance. It sounded sophisticated, yet fun, and conveyed the sense of exclusivity I was aiming for. Now, I needed a product. I decided to start small. Instead of creating a massive inventory, I reached out to smaller brands and artisans who could provide unique products. I negotiated deals where I only paid for items once I had customers lined up. This allowed me to minimize my risk while still offering exclusive products. It wasn't easy. A lot of brands weren't interested in working with someone who didn't have a proven track record. But I didn't give up. I kept pitching my idea, honing my pitch, and trying to convince people that this was something they wanted to be a part of. After months of hustling, I had enough products lined up to launch my first box. But there was still a problem. I had 0 customers. I had no email list, no social media following, and no reputation. So, I did what any aspiring entrepreneur would do. I leveraged my network. I reached out to friends, family, and acquaintances, asking them to share my website on their social media pages and to help spread the word. I offered discounts and incentives for early sign-ups, hoping to generate some buzz. The first few weeks were rough. I barely made any sales. I spent countless hours working on marketing campaigns, trying to build my brand's presence online. But despite all my efforts, I was barely making enough to cover my expenses. I remember lying in bed some nights, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But I didn't give up. I kept pushing forward, tweaking my strategy, and learning from my mistakes. Slowly but surely, things began to pick up. Word of mouth started to work in my favor. A few influencers took notice and mentioned my boxes on their social media accounts. This gave me a huge boost in visibility. I started getting more subscribers, and the revenue started to trickle in. The breakthrough moment came about 6 months after I launched. I landed a feature on a popular lifestyle blog. It wasn't a massive blog, but it had a dedicated following. That single feature brought in hundreds of new subscribers. It was the first time I felt like my hard work was actually paying off. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. But success didn't come overnight. I had to keep working tirelessly to improve every aspect of my business. I spent sleepless nights perfecting my marketing campaigns, designing better packaging, and sourcing even more exclusive products. I constantly engaged with my customers, asking for feedback and making improvements based on their suggestions. Over time, my brand grew, and my customer base expanded. The challenges didn't stop there. I had to figure out logistics, how to scale my operations without sacrificing quality. I had to learn about shipping, inventory management, and customer service. There were setbacks along the way. There were months when I barely broke even, and there were moments when I thought about quitting. But I pushed through, and little by little, my business grew. By the time I hit my 2-year mark, I had over 5,000 subscribers, and my business was generating significant revenue. I had built a team to help me with customer service, marketing, and logistics. What started as a one-man operation from my tiny apartment had grown into a thriving company. Today, Boxed Brilliance is one of the top subscription box services in its niche, and I've been able to scale it into a profitable business that supports my dream of financial independence. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about having a great idea. It's about persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to fail and learn from those failures. Looking back, I realized that the journey was never as smooth as it looked from the outside. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and mistakes along the way. But the biggest lesson I learned was this: success doesn't come from having the perfect plan or the best product. It comes from the ability to keep going, no matter how hard it gets. The hustle is real, but so is the reward. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm closer than I've ever been, and I know that every step, no matter how difficult, was worth it. If I can do it, so can you. Just keep pushing forward, and don't let anyone or anything stop you from chasing your dreams. I had always been a dreamer. From a young age, I imagined a life where I was in control of my time, my business, and my destiny. I wasn't interested in the typical path: college, corporate job, promotion after promotion. I knew I was meant for something bigger, but I wasn't sure what that something bigger was going to be. After high school, I decided to take a gap year. Instead of jumping straight into college, I worked odd jobs: bartending, retail, even a stint as a freelance graphic designer. I did it all. But in the back of my mind, I was always looking for that big idea that would set me apart from everyone else. That one thing that would allow me to work for myself and not have to answer to anyone. One night, while scrolling through Instagram, I saw a post about dropshipping, a business model where you sell products online without ever touching inventory. It was simple, they said. All you had to do was set up an online store, find products from suppliers, and market them. The supplier would handle everything else: shipping, packaging, returns. It sounded almost too good to be true, but it also felt like something I could do. So, I dove into learning everything I could about dropshipping. I devoured YouTube videos, read blogs, and joined forums. I spent hours every day researching, trying to understand the ins and outs of online business. I started to realize that there were hundreds of thousands of people doing this, and many of them were making significant amounts of money. It wasn't going to be easy, but it seemed achievable. I spent the next few months putting together my first online store. I chose a niche, a trendy category I thought would do well, and built my website from scratch. It wasn't pretty at first, but it was functional. I found a supplier who would ship directly to customers and set everything up. The first product I listed? A cheap, Chinese-made phone case. I thought, if I can sell this, I can sell anything. I remember the night I launched my store. I sat in front of my laptop, refreshing the page every few minutes. Nothing. Then, a few hours later, boom. A sale. I couldn't believe it. It was like a switch had flipped in my brain. I had made my first dollar online. The feeling was unreal. I knew this was the start of something, but I also knew that one sale didn't mean success. I had to keep going. For the next few weeks, I spent every waking hour working on my business. I experimented with Facebook ads, trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. I struggled with copywriting, figuring out how to write compelling product descriptions and ads that would actually convert. My website wasn't getting as much traffic as I'd hoped, and I quickly ran out of money for ads. I remember lying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling, feeling completely defeated. But I couldn't give up now, not after coming so far. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of running Facebook ads, I focused on Instagram marketing. I created a separate account for my store, started posting every day, and reached out to influencers in my niche. It took time, but slowly I started to gain followers. I would DM people asking them to check out my store, offering small discounts for followers and customers. And gradually, I started seeing more and more sales trickle in. But it wasn't just the sales that made me excited, it was the feedback. People were genuinely excited about the products I was selling. They loved the designs, the variety, and the quality. Some customers even reached out to thank me personally. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly making a difference. It was a feeling I hadn't gotten from any job before. Then came the real breakthrough. I found a supplier for a unique product, a high-quality, customizable water bottle. It was something I hadn't seen many people selling, and it was right in line with the health-conscious market I was targeting. I launched it on my store, and within a few days, it went viral on Instagram. Influencers were posting about it, and customers were tagging their friends. Sales exploded. At this point, I could barely keep up. My sales were growing faster than I could process the orders. I had to hire a virtual assistant to help manage customer service, another person to handle social media, and I eventually hired someone to run my ads. The business was officially growing. But as the sales started pouring in, so did the problems. The supplier I was working with couldn't keep up with the demand. Packages were delayed, and customers were starting to get frustrated. I had to find a new supplier, which meant more time spent vetting different companies and testing their products. I also had to set up a better system for customer service. But every time I fixed one problem, another one popped up. There were days when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. I was overwhelmed. I was working 16-hour days, barely getting any sleep. But the business was growing, and I was seeing the potential. So, I pushed through. Eventually, I started seeing the fruits of my labor. My monthly revenue grew from a few $100s to a few thousand, and then to tens of thousands. I was finally at a point where I could pay myself a salary. Not only that, but I was able to help support my family. I paid off my student loans, moved into a nicer apartment, and even bought my first car. I also started to give back. I partnered with local charities, donating a portion of my profits to causes I cared about. I used my success to help others, and that made me feel even more fulfilled. But with success came a new set of challenges. The competition in the dropshipping space was fierce. I had to constantly innovate, coming up with new products and marketing strategies to stay ahead. It wasn't easy, but it was rewarding. Fast forward to today, and my business has become something I could never have imagined. I've expanded into new niches, hired a team, and even built a brand around my products. My life is still far from perfect. I still have sleepless nights, stress, and challenges, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about finding that one big idea. It's about hard work, perseverance, and adapting to change. It's about constantly pushing yourself and never giving up, even when things get tough. And most importantly, it's about having the courage to take that first step, even when you have no idea where the road will lead. If I had one piece of advice for anyone thinking about starting their own business, it would be this: don't wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment never comes. Start small, learn from your mistakes, and keep going. You'll get there. And to anyone out there struggling, feeling like it's all too much, trust me, I've been there. Just keep pushing. You've got this. I've been an entrepreneur for nearly 12 years now, but looking back, it feels like it all started with a simple idea, an impossible dream, and a lot of failure. The journey wasn't easy, and there's no magic recipe for success, but it's something I'd never trade for anything. So, I guess this is my story of how I went from broke and confused to running a 7-figure business. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty, but it was worth it. My story begins in my early 20s when I was still figuring things out. I was fresh out of college, having barely scraped through with a degree in communications. Honestly, I wasn't passionate about it at all. I just didn't know what else to do. My parents were supportive, but they made it clear that they didn't think a communications degree would help me land a lucrative job. So, I found myself hopping from one dead-end job to another, part-time retail positions, a stint as a barista, and even a few months doing temp work in offices. I hated it. The monotony, the 9-to-5 grind, the lack of control, it wasn't for me. But during those years, I had a burning idea that kept me up at night. I had always loved technology and gadgets, and I was obsessed with the idea of creating something that would make people's lives easier. One night, after another soul-crushing shift at a coffee shop, I thought about building an online store. I didn't know what I'd sell, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I started researching, learning about e-commerce, dropshipping, and building websites. I spent every free moment watching YouTube videos, reading articles, and trying to absorb as much as I could. The more I learned, the more excited I became. I realized that the only thing stopping me from starting my own business was me. But there was one huge problem. I had no money to start anything. I didn't even have enough to cover rent for the next month. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and the thought of investing in something risky like starting a business felt impossible. That's when I started looking into crowdfunding. I discovered Kickstarter and Indiegogo and thought maybe I could raise the money to develop a product. I had no idea what that product would be, but I knew I needed to think of something unique. I had just enough money saved up to get a cheap laptop and start working on ideas, so I set to work, trying to come up with the next big thing. After a few weeks of brainstorming, I came up with a concept for a smart home device. I figured that smart homes were going to be huge, and if I could create something that would integrate seamlessly with people's daily lives, it could be a hit. I had no engineering background, no team, and zero experience in product development, but I threw together a crude prototype. It was barely functional, but I was determined. I set up a crowdfunding campaign with what little I had and launched it with a mixture of excitement and dread. I knew it could either make or break me. I shared the campaign on social media, sent emails to friends, and even reached out to some tech blogs. The response was underwhelming. At first, I barely made any money. I had expected the floodgates to open and for people to throw money at my idea, but the reality was harsh. No one cared. The design was clunky, the pitch was weak, and the market wasn't interested. But I didn't give up. I read every article I could find on failed Kickstarter campaigns and figured out what I had done wrong. I started from scratch, redesigned the product, revamped the campaign, and tried again. This time, things were different. I put my heart into it, made sure the campaign looked professional, and contacted influencers in the tech space who might help spread the word. Slowly but surely, the money started trickling in. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was enough to keep me going. I ended up raising enough funds to create a better prototype and build my first batch of products. The next step was finding manufacturers, figuring out logistics, and setting up a real online store. At this point, I was still living paycheck to paycheck, so I had to juggle my day job while working on the business in the evenings and weekends. It was exhausting, but the adrenaline of creating something was enough to keep me going. After months of work, I finally launched the first batch of products. They sold out faster than I had expected, but there were still so many hurdles. I ran into issues with shipping delays, customer service complaints, and inventory shortages. Every step forward felt like a step back. There were days when I thought about quitting, when the weight of the failure seemed too much to bear. But there was something deep down inside me that refused to give up. I started scaling my operations by outsourcing tasks, hiring my first few employees, and investing in more sophisticated marketing techniques. Slowly but surely, the company grew. I started learning about the importance of branding, customer experience, and creating a community around the product. It wasn't just about selling stuff anymore. It was about building something people cared about. 5 years in, I hit a major milestone. I made my first million. I had built a small but solid team, expanded my product line, and had a loyal customer base. But I knew I still had a long way to go. The pressure to innovate and stay ahead of the competition was constant. The landscape was always changing, and I had to keep up with it. In the years since, I've made a lot of mistakes and experienced a fair share of failures. But I've also learned some hard truths about what it takes to succeed. Building a business is not about having a great idea or a smooth launch. It's about persistence, adapting to changes, and learning from every mistake along the way. Today, my company is worth over 7 figures, and I'm proud of what I've built. But when I look back at that scared, broke 20-something who had no clue what they were doing, I realize how far I've come. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was all worth it. So, for anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple. Start where you are, with what you have, and don't stop. The journey is long and tough, but if you keep pushing, the rewards are beyond what you can imagine. Just remember to learn, grow, and never, ever give up. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur. In fact, the idea of running my own business was always something I imagined other people could do, but not me. I didn't come from a family of business owners, nor did I have any particularly entrepreneurial role models. I was just a regular kid, raised in a small town, trying to find my way. But now, as I sit in my office, reflecting on the long journey I've taken, I realize that becoming a business owner wasn't just a dream I stumbled upon. It was something I fought for. Let me rewind a bit to give you some perspective. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college, when I started my first real job in the city. I had always been an eager student, and despite growing up in a small town, I managed to get into a pretty competitive university. The job I landed was a decent one for a new graduate, marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company. I was excited at first, thinking I'd climb the corporate ladder quickly. But after a year of 9 to 5 routine, the thrill wore off. It wasn't that I didn't like my job. I did. I enjoyed the work, the people, and the environment. But I quickly realized that my role, like most corporate roles, was going to keep me in the same position for a while. Promotions weren't guaranteed, and I'd need to spend years paying my dues, which seemed pointless when I knew there were so many opportunities in the world. That's when I started thinking about entrepreneurship. I'd seen stories of people who started small businesses and grew them into multi-million-dollar companies. It was the dream of many, but I didn't think it was realistic for someone like me. I had student loans, no business experience, and very little capital. Still, the idea kept nagging at me. What if I could turn my passion for marketing into a business? What if I could help small businesses grow the way I wanted to see my own career grow? The idea took hold, but the fear of failure gripped me for a while. How could I compete with experienced entrepreneurs? What made me think I had what it took to succeed in such a competitive environment? But then I realized that every successful entrepreneur had been in the same position I was. They started with nothing and built their companies through hard work, learning from mistakes, and perseverance. I didn't quit my job right away. That would have been reckless. Instead, I spent nights and weekends researching, learning, and planning. I taught myself everything I could about starting a business. From marketing strategies to legal structures, I devoured books, articles, and online courses. I also sought out mentors, people who had been in my shoes and could offer advice on the most difficult parts of starting a business. They told me the same thing. If you want to succeed, you have to start. So, I did. I started small, really small. I created a website offering freelance marketing services. I focused on helping small businesses and startups with their branding and social media. I was terrified that no one would take me seriously, but I kept at it. I reached out to local businesses, offering free consultations and offering my services for a discounted rate in exchange for testimonials and case studies. At first, I didn't get many clients. I remember my first paid gig was a small bakery down the street. They needed help with social media and brand strategy. I worked tirelessly, often putting in 16-hour days, balancing my day job with my side hustle. But slowly, things started to pick up. The bakery's social media grew, and I was able to help them bring in new customers. They loved the work I did and recommended me to other businesses. As my client list grew, so did my confidence. I started to realize that I had a skill set that people valued. I wasn't just a marketing coordinator, I was a problem solver. Businesses needed help growing, and I could be the one to help them. That's when I made the decision to leave my job. Leaving the security of a steady paycheck was terrifying. I had saved up a small emergency fund, but I was far from financially stable. There were days when I doubted my decision, when I questioned whether I had made a huge mistake. But the one thing that kept me going was my belief that I could do this. At first, it wasn't easy. I had to hustle harder than ever before. There were weeks where I barely had enough money to cover rent, and I had to work 12-hour days just to keep up with my clients. But as I gained more clients, I realized that I was starting to build something real. I hired my first employee, a freelance graphic designer, and we started offering more services to our clients, including website design and search engine optimization. The growth was slow at first, but it was steady. With each new client, we got better at what we did. We refined our processes, learned from our mistakes, and adapted to changes in the marketing world. Over time, we built a reputation for providing high-quality, results-driven marketing services for small businesses. By the time my business hit its 2-year anniversary, I had a full team working with me. We had several high-profile clients and a growing portfolio. I had become the entrepreneur I once thought was out of reach. But even then, the challenges didn't stop. Every day presented new obstacles, new hurdles that we had to overcome. Whether it was dealing with difficult clients, managing cash flow, or navigating the complexities of hiring employees, it felt like there was always something new to learn. One of the hardest lessons I learned was the importance of managing growth. As my company expanded, I had to ensure that we didn't overextend ourselves or take on too much at once. Scaling too quickly can be just as damaging as not scaling at all. I spent a lot of time focusing on building a sustainable business model, one that could continue to grow but not at the expense of our reputation or the quality of our work. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I went from being a terrified 23-year-old marketing coordinator to running a company that serves clients all over the country. I didn't have a grand plan or a big break. I just kept moving forward, one step at a time. The entrepreneurial journey is never easy. It's full of highs and lows, moments of triumph and moments of doubt. But it's also incredibly rewarding. I've learned that success isn't about having the perfect plan or the right connections. It's about having the perseverance to keep going even when things don't go as expected. If you keep learning, adapting, and pushing forward, success will eventually follow. Now, I'm proud of what I've built, but I'm also proud of the person I've become in the process. Entrepreneurship has changed me in ways I never imagined. It's taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of believing in myself when no one else does. If you're reading this and wondering if you have what it takes to start your own business, the answer is yes. You have everything you need inside you. It's just a matter of taking that first step, no matter how terrifying it might seem. I'm living proof that it's possible to turn a dream into reality, even if you start with nothing but an idea and a lot of determination. I've always been the kind of person who believes in doing things my own way. Growing up, I saw the world around me in a different light. While others were content with traditional routes to success, I always wondered if there was more to life than just following the crowd. So, when I decided to start my own business, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. This is my story of how I turned a small idea into a full-fledged business that changed my life forever. It all started back in 2015. I was fresh out of college, armed with a degree in business management, but no real idea of how to apply it. I'd worked a few odd jobs during school, nothing special. The typical stuff: waiting tables, working retail, doing internships for companies that weren't interested in me beyond my hours. After graduation, I had a brief stint at a startup, and that's when I got the taste of what it really meant to be an entrepreneur. One thing I learned quickly from working at that startup was the importance of solving real problems. They weren't selling products, they were offering solutions. And that stuck with me. I realized that I wanted to do something that had meaning, something that could actually make people's lives easier. But I had no money, no connections, and honestly, no idea how to even start a business. I remember one night, after a long shift at the startup, I was walking home when it hit me. I could create something that made everyday life more efficient. I wasn't going to start an app or anything flashy, though. I wanted something that could bring value to people without feeling like they were just another user being sold to. The idea came when I noticed how much I hated carrying around a heavy purse all the time. Women's bags, in particular, are designed to hold a ton of stuff, most of which we don't need. I thought about the idea of making a bag that could hold just the essentials, but in a way that didn't feel bulky or impractical. Something stylish, versatile, and functional all in one. I spent weeks sketching designs, researching materials, and looking into the business side of things. I didn't have any capital to start with, so I knew that I would need to be resourceful. I began by contacting local manufacturers to see if I could get a small run of bags produced. They laughed at me at first. "You're not even a business owner," one of them said. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I made a plan to use Kickstarter to raise the money I needed. To make the campaign work, I knew I had to be personal. I didn't want to just throw up some generic marketing on a crowdfunding platform and hope for the best. I had to sell the idea, not just the product. I created a video that told my story, how I came up with the idea, why it mattered, and how I believed I could make life easier for busy women who didn't want to sacrifice style for practicality. I made sure the video was honest and raw. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just being real. The Kickstarter campaign was slow at first. I remember checking the funding every few hours, hoping for a burst of donations, but for days, it barely moved. There were moments where I wanted to give up. My friends and family were supportive, but there wasn't much they could do besides back the campaign. I had to find a way to convince total strangers that my idea was worth their time and money. One night, after about a week of being stuck at 20% of my goal, I had a breakthrough. I started reaching out to influencers in the fashion and lifestyle space, offering them free bags in exchange for sharing my campaign on social media. To my surprise, a few of them responded. They loved the concept and were happy to help. Within hours, my campaign was picking up steam. Small pledges turned into larger ones, and suddenly, I was seeing my goal grow every day. By the time the campaign ended, I had raised over $50,000, more than enough to fund my initial order and start making real progress. I used the money to place an order for my first batch of bags, and then the real work began. Shipping, branding, marketing, and customer service became my new life. I remember pulling all-nighters, stuffing envelopes, and figuring out how to make my website functional. There were a lot of things I didn't know how to do, but I was willing to learn. The first few months were a blur. I made mistakes, of course, some big ones. For example, I ordered too many bags in the wrong color, thinking they'd be a hit, only for them to sit in a warehouse. That mistake cost me a lot of money and delayed shipments to backers. But I learned from it and adjusted. I realized that failure wasn't something to be afraid of. It was part of the process. Every setback was a lesson. As time went on, the brand began to take shape. My bags were getting good reviews. People loved the design, the quality, and the fact that they were made with practicality in mind. I started to gain a following on social media, and sales began to grow steadily. But I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more than just a small business. I wanted to create a brand that people would recognize, a brand that stood for something. In 2017, I took the leap and quit my job at the startup to go full-time with my business. It wasn't easy. I had no safety net, no fallback plan. It was just me and my bags. I lived on a tight budget, reinvesting every penny I made back into the business. But there was something about it that felt right. It felt like I was on the path to something bigger. By 2019, my company had grown into a full-fledged brand. I expanded my product line, introduced new colors and designs, and started collaborating with other brands. The bags I originally designed to make life easier for busy women had evolved into a symbol of empowerment. They were more than just bags. They represented confidence, efficiency, and living life on your own terms. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come. From that small idea, with no funding or experience, I built something that has changed my life in ways I never expected. It hasn't been easy, and it still isn't, but I wouldn't change a thing. There's no magic formula for success, no secret trick. It's all about perseverance, passion, and a willingness to learn from every mistake. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't come from waiting around for the perfect opportunity. It comes from taking risks, staying true to your vision, and being adaptable. There will be days when you feel like giving up, but the moment you push through is the moment everything starts to change. I'll be honest, starting a business is the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also the most rewarding. And if you're sitting there wondering if you can do it too, the answer is yes. If I can go from a college graduate with no experience to a business owner with a global brand, so can you. Just believe in yourself, put in the work, and never stop learning. This is a story about how a 24-year-old guy with no background in business ended up running a company that generates 7 figures in revenue a year. If you're like me, you probably read stories of successful entrepreneurs and think, how did they do it? What's their secret? Well, here's mine, and I think it's a pretty wild ride that started with nothing more than an idea and a lot of grit. I've always been into tech, even back in high school. I didn't know a lot about coding or anything like that, but I loved how the internet seemed to open up so many possibilities. My friends and I would always joke about starting some crazy business, but we never actually took it seriously. When I went to college, I started thinking a little more about entrepreneurship, but I never imagined it would happen so quickly. The catalyst for everything came when I was 23. I had just finished a semester at university and was feeling completely burnt out. I was studying business, but it didn't excite me. It felt too theoretical, and I wasn't sure how to turn that into something real. I'd seen friends graduate with degrees and end up in dead-end jobs, and I knew I didn't want that for myself. At that time, I had a part-time job at a local tech support company, just doing basic IT help for businesses in my area. The job itself wasn't terrible, but I started to feel like I could be doing more. I began thinking about a gap in the market. Most small businesses around town had terrible websites. I'm talking about 90s-style designs that were not mobile-friendly, slow, and just overall bad. And I knew from my tech support job that they were all paying a premium to have these websites built and maintained. I thought to myself, why don't I start something where I could help them with affordable, modern websites? So, in the middle of a long weekend, I came up with an idea. I would create a service that offered website design and maintenance, focusing on small businesses in my area. It wouldn't be like the overpriced web agencies that charge thousands of dollars for a site. Instead, I would focus on delivering high-quality websites at a fraction of the price. I didn't have much experience in web design, but I was a quick learner and knew I could figure it out. I did what anyone would do in my shoes. I Googled everything. How to build a website, how to get clients, how to market myself. It felt like everything was a massive mountain to climb, but it was exhilarating. I spent the next few weeks creating my first site, setting up a simple landing page with a portfolio of mock-up designs. I decided to call the company Quick Site Solutions because, well, I wanted people to know it was quick and easy. I didn't have any money to invest, so I used my savings to buy a basic hosting plan and a cheap domain. I couldn't afford any ads, so I turned to social media. I started by reaching out to small businesses around town, offering them free consultations. I went door to door, offering advice on how their websites could be better. Some business owners laughed me off. Others were interested but not ready to commit. One guy, a local restaurant owner, seemed to like my ideas and said, "You know, we've been thinking about redesigning our website for a while. How much would it cost?" I had no idea, but I quoted him a price based on what I thought was reasonable for me to charge while still making a profit. He agreed, and just like that, I had my first real client. I spent the next few weeks working nonstop. I taught myself basic web design, did the research, and learned about SEO, search engine optimization, so the site wouldn't just look pretty, it would actually bring in traffic. I finished the website, handed it over, and received my first payment. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like winning the lottery. I had just built something real, and someone was paying me for it. With my first project under my belt, I was energized. I started getting more clients, and this time, I didn't go door to door. Instead, I relied on word of mouth. The restaurant owner referred me to a local gym owner, who referred me to a small law firm, and so on. The more projects I completed, the more confident I became in my skills. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to grow my business, so I hired a couple of freelancers to help with the workload. I was still doing the sales and design work, but it felt good to delegate some of the tasks. I had no office, just a small desk in my bedroom, but I was getting work done. At first, it was just a side hustle, but within a year, QuickSight Solutions had enough clients that I could quit my part-time job and do it full-time. I had made a few $1,000s in profit that year, but the most important thing wasn't the money. It was the fact that I had something real, a business I could grow. By the time I turned 25, I hired a full-time employee to handle customer service and the day-to-day operations. I focused on scaling the business, reaching out to more clients, and offering new services. I launched a package where I would create websites for new businesses, helping them from the ground up with branding, design, and marketing. My reputation started to grow, and soon enough, I was working with bigger clients. The next big breakthrough came when I realized I could create a SaaS, software as a service, product to help businesses manage their websites on their own. I knew there was a market for it. There were plenty of small businesses that wanted a website but couldn't afford a full-time team to maintain it. So, I hired a development team and spent the next year building the software. By the time it launched, QuickSight Solutions had already become a household name in my area, and the SaaS product took us national. Now, at 28, QuickSight Solutions is a seven-figure company, and we've expanded to offer digital marketing services, custom software, and even e-commerce solutions for businesses. We've helped over 500 clients, and we continue to grow every year. But it didn't happen overnight. There were sleepless nights, failures, and countless moments when I wanted to quit. But I kept going because I genuinely believed in my vision. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. I didn't have an MBA or any fancy degrees. I just had a dream and the determination to make it happen. If you take anything from this, let it be this: start where you are, with what you have. It's not about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about taking the first step, even when you're scared. And remember, every big success starts with an idea. If I can do it, so can you. The journey isn't easy, but it's worth it. I never thought I'd be where I am today. I didn't grow up with the dream big kind of mindset, and honestly, I never imagined I'd become an entrepreneur. It all started back in 2016, when I was just another 26-year-old trying to make ends meet, working as a waiter at a mid-range restaurant in my city. The job was decent enough, but I knew I needed more, something that could give me the life I wanted, not the life I was living. The idea hit me completely by accident. One night, after my shift, a regular customer came in, a guy I had served many times before. We'd talk about sports, life, and the usual, but on this particular night, he seemed a bit different. His name was Dan, and he worked in real estate. After some casual small talk, he started asking me about my plans for the future. I was tired of answering the same way. I don't know yet, still figuring it out. But this time, something in me clicked. Maybe it was the exhaustion of always feeling stuck. Or maybe it was just the right moment, but I finally said, I want to build something that's mine. Dan's eyes lit up. He leaned forward, all excited, and said, "That's the best thing you could say to yourself. Do you have any ideas?" I remember shrugging. Not really. I mean, I'd love to do something that involves food, but I don't know what. I'm just trying to figure it out. He smiled and said, "That's fine. Food is always a great industry to be in. The trick is finding the right angle." I didn't get it at first, but I knew one thing. I had to get out of that restaurant job. The same routine every day was draining me, and I needed to find something that could give me more freedom. I took Dan's advice to heart and started doing some research. I spent nights after work browsing the web, reading about business, entrepreneurship, and food startups. That's when I stumbled across the concept of meal prep companies, businesses that provide pre-cooked, healthy meals to customers, usually on a subscription basis. At first, I thought, is this a thing? It sounds like something I could get behind. I spent weeks planning out a business idea, a meal prep service that focused on delivering fresh, locally sourced meals to busy professionals who didn't have the time or inclination to cook for themselves. The goal wasn't just to provide food, it was to create something that felt personal, like a home-cooked meal made with love, but with the convenience of modern delivery services. I didn't have much capital. In fact, I had very little. But I had something more important: determination. I started small. I borrowed some money from my parents, who didn't exactly believe in my dream but were kind enough to help, and I used it to rent out a small kitchen space. My first hire was a local chef, a guy named Tony who had been working at another restaurant nearby. Tony didn't have any experience with meal prep services, but he knew food. That was good enough for me. The first few weeks were brutal. I barely slept. I would wake up at 5 a.m. to start prepping meals, work until 10 p.m., and then go home to try to get a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. I didn't have a website or even a delivery service at the time. Everything was word of mouth, and my main mode of advertising was Instagram. I posted pictures of the meals Tony and I were making, trying to create a sense of excitement and quality around the product. It wasn't much, but it was something. Slowly, people started reaching out, mostly friends of friends or people who had heard about us from word of mouth. I started getting a small but steady stream of customers, all of them asking for specific meal plans, from high-protein diets to gluten-free options. Every time a new order came in, it felt like a victory, like someone trusted me with their time and money. But then, just when I thought I was getting the hang of it, disaster struck. Tony, my chef, had to leave the business. He got an offer from a high-end restaurant, and though I was happy for him, I was devastated. The kitchen was in chaos. I had no backup plan, no experience with cooking myself, and no idea how to keep the momentum going. I almost gave up then. The thought of losing everything was terrifying. But after a sleepless night filled with doubt, I decided to take action. I recruited a new chef, a woman named Sarah who had just finished culinary school and was looking for a break. She didn't have experience with meal prep, but she was eager to learn and passionate about food. Sarah and I spent countless hours testing new recipes, trying to improve our offerings. As the weeks went by, we started getting more consistent orders. Still, the real breakthrough came when I decided to take a bigger risk. I took out a small business loan and invested in a website, something professional that could make our meal plans more accessible. The site launched, and almost immediately, we started seeing a spike in traffic. People were now able to order online, schedule weekly deliveries, and even customize their meal plans. By the end of 2017, we had a loyal customer base. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep the business going. My biggest challenge now was managing the logistics of delivering fresh meals on time. I hired a small team of delivery drivers, and we began offering multiple delivery days a week to accommodate customers' schedules. I also started partnering with local gyms and health clubs to offer meal prep services for their members. This was the game changer. By partnering with businesses that had access to my target market, I started getting more referrals than ever. In 2018, things started to really take off. The customer base grew significantly, and I was able to hire more staff, kitchen workers, a marketing team, and more delivery drivers. I began outsourcing some of the operations, including marketing, so I could focus on growing the business. I kept pushing forward, trying new strategies, and learning from my mistakes. As the business grew, I expanded the menu, offering different dietary plans and even incorporating snacks. By 2019, I was making enough money to live comfortably, and I finally had time to step away from the daily grind and start thinking about bigger goals. By 2020, we had become one of the largest meal prep companies in the region, catering to hundreds of customers daily. I'm proud of how far I've come, but it hasn't been easy. There were moments when I thought I wouldn't make it, when I felt like everything was crumbling beneath me. But every time I hit a wall, I kept pushing forward. Today, I'm still working on scaling the business, exploring new opportunities, and thinking about how to make it even better. But one thing's for sure, I would never have made it if I hadn't decided to take that first step, to take a risk and bet on myself. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. If you're out there wondering if it's worth it, I can tell you that it absolutely is. When I was 24, I had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do with my life. I had a degree in marketing, but I hated the idea of working for someone else, grinding away at a 9-to-5 job that offered little to no creative freedom. I was stuck in that phase where I didn't know if I wanted to pursue a job that was in line with my degree, take a risk on starting something on my own, or just wander around aimlessly for a while, hoping to figure it out. I had spent years watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, reading self-help books, basically absorbing everything I could about business and personal growth. The idea of entrepreneurship had always intrigued me, but I never really thought it was something I could do. I was raised in a middle-class family where job security was always emphasized, and being an entrepreneur seemed like something for people who had money or resources or were just born lucky. But after a while, I started to wonder if I was missing something. One evening, after another miserable day working as a marketing assistant, I stumbled across a blog post that changed everything. It was about a young guy who had started a small online business selling niche products and turned it into a six-figure income within a year. His story was inspiring because it didn't sound like some rags-to-riches fantasy. It was practical, relatable, and best of all, he made it seem possible. He wasn't some tech genius or seasoned entrepreneur. He was just a regular guy who took a risk and started small. The next day, I made the decision. I was going to start my own business. But here's the catch. I had no idea what business to start. I didn't have a revolutionary idea, and I didn't have tons of cash to invest. So I started where most people do, by looking at what people were already buying. I spent hours scrolling through e-commerce sites, reading about trending products, and looking for gaps in the market. Eventually, I found something that caught my attention: phone accessories. At first, I wasn't sure if it was a dumb idea or if there was potential. Phone accessories were everywhere, and the market seemed oversaturated. But then I had a thought. What if I could focus on a specific niche within the market? Instead of selling generic cases and chargers, I could target a specific group of people, those who were passionate about unique, customizable phone accessories. I didn't have much money to start with, just a couple of $1,000s that I had saved up from working my marketing job. I knew I had to be strategic about how I spent it. So, I did what any self-respecting entrepreneur would do. I Googled everything. I spent weeks researching suppliers, learning how to build an e-commerce store, and figuring out how to run Facebook ads. It was overwhelming at first, and there were days when I felt like I was way in over my head. I remember setting up my website and then staring at it for hours, wondering if anyone would ever visit, let alone buy anything. I started small, just a handful of phone cases and a couple of other accessories. I didn't want to invest in inventory I couldn't sell, so I went with a drop shipping model, where the supplier would ship the product directly to the customer after they made a purchase. This allowed me to minimize my financial risk while still testing the market. The first month was brutal. I had no sales, no traffic, and no idea what I was doing wrong. I felt like I was pouring all my time and energy into something that wasn't going to work. But I didn't give up. I doubled down on my learning and kept tweaking my ads and website based on the little feedback I was getting. Eventually, things started to click. One of my Facebook ads finally got some traction, and within days, I had my first sale. It wasn't a huge victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. That first sale was a sign that what I was doing could work. It wasn't just a dream. It was something I could build into a real business. After that, things started to snowball. I reinvested every dollar I made back into the business, testing new products, running more ads, and optimizing my website. Slowly but surely, the sales started to come in more consistently. My website went from having just a few visitors a day to hundreds. I was working on my business after my 9 to 5 job, staying up late into the night, learning about SEO, email marketing, and building my brand. By the end of that year, my side hustle had become my full-time gig. I quit my marketing job, and by then, I was making enough to sustain myself with the business. But the journey wasn't without its setbacks. The next challenge came when I realized that my supplier was unreliable. I'd get customer complaints about delayed shipments or damaged products, and it felt like I was constantly putting out fires. This was a wake-up call for me. I knew I couldn't scale my business with suppliers who were unreliable. So, I decided to start ordering inventory and storing it myself, which meant higher upfront costs, but also better control over product quality and shipping times. This decision changed everything. I went from drop shipping to holding my own inventory, and while the cash flow was tighter, the results were worth it. I also expanded my product line, started offering custom designs, and began building a brand that resonated with my customers. I wasn't just selling phone accessories anymore. I was selling a lifestyle. Fast forward to today, and my business has grown far beyond what I ever thought was possible. I now have a small team helping me with operations, customer service, and marketing. We've launched our own line of branded accessories, and we're expanding into other niche markets. What's crazy is that even though the business is doing well now, I still think back to that moment when I had no clue what I was doing. It wasn't a perfect journey. There were so many failures, doubts, and moments when I thought I'd never make it. But the one thing I kept doing was showing up, learning from my mistakes, and never giving up on the dream. Looking back, I realized that the key wasn't some magical business idea or a huge amount of money. It was persistence and a willingness to learn and adapt. And now, I get to do what I love every single day. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone thinking of starting their own business, it's this: start small, be prepared to fail, and never give up. Every success story you see is built on a mountain of failures that no one talks about. The only way you'll ever get to the top is if you keep climbing, even when it feels impossible. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and zero practical experience. I had all the theories and strategies I needed to make it in the corporate world, but not the first clue on how to actually start something of my own. Like many young people, I had big dreams but lacked direction. I had always been the type who thought of myself as a natural-born entrepreneur, always coming up with ideas. Some were decent, others were totally ridiculous, but the truth was, I didn't know how to execute any of them. I worked at a corporate job for 2 years after graduation, constantly frustrated with the red tape, office politics, and feeling like I was just another cog in the machine. One evening, I was sitting on my couch scrolling through Instagram, watching all these entrepreneurs and influencers promote their businesses. They looked like they had it all, flexing their success with flashy cars, exotic vacations, and an army of followers hanging on every word. I remember thinking, if they can do it, so can I. But the question was, what could I do? After weeks of mulling it over, an idea finally struck me during a late-night conversation with my best friend, Jake. We were discussing the growing trend of meal delivery services. It seemed like everyone was either using them or thinking about trying them. But the problem was that most of these services either focused on pre-made meals or really expensive organic options that were hard to get for the average consumer. What if there was a way to deliver healthy, fresh, and affordable meal kits? That was the spark. I didn't waste any time. I was young, living rent-free in my parents' basement, and had nothing to lose. I took out a small loan from a family member, borrowed a beat-up old van, and started my own meal kit delivery service. At first, it was just me and Jake. We packaged ingredients, built websites, and advertised through social media. I had no clue about logistics, marketing, or even how to properly set up a website, but I figured it out. Honestly, that's the only thing that really separated me from everyone else, the willingness to just figure things out and not be scared of failing. In the beginning, sales were painfully slow. I'd get a few orders here and there, but nothing substantial. I remember spending entire weekends driving across the city delivering these meal kits to people who had no idea who I was, praying they wouldn't realize they could probably get the same food for half the price at the grocery store. The first real breakthrough came when I decided to focus on customer feedback. I sent out surveys to every single person who had purchased a kit, asking them to rate their experience, what they liked, and what they didn't. One customer, a fitness enthusiast, told me that she loved the idea but wanted more options that catered specifically to her dietary needs. That was the key moment when I realized I had to narrow down my niche, healthy, fitness-focused meal kits. From there, everything changed. I updated my website, made the meals even more tailored to specific dietary goals, and launched a social media campaign focused on people who were into fitness and health. I went on Instagram, created workout challenges, and offered discounts to people who shared their fitness journeys using my meal kits. The orders started rolling in. It wasn't easy, though. With each new milestone, there was always a bigger problem to solve. I had to hire more people to help with packaging and delivery. I rented a small warehouse space to keep up with the increasing number of orders. Logistics became a nightmare as I had to manage delivery routes, ensure quality control, and meet customer expectations. I remember spending 14-hour days just trying to keep the business afloat, but every time I thought about quitting, I reminded myself of why I started. I couldn't let all that hard work go to waste. About a year in, I made a major decision that turned out to be one of the best moves I ever made. I partnered with a food supplier who could offer me bulk pricing, allowing me to lower the cost of the meal kit significantly. That's when everything took off. The cheaper prices made the service much more appealing to a wider audience, and the demand surged. But then came the pandemic. Like most businesses, my company was hit hard. The whole world came to a halt, and with gyms closing, people were shifting to cooking at home more than ever. The problem was that I didn't have the infrastructure to meet the suddenly overwhelming demand. I had to quickly scale up, new delivery partners, more warehouse space, and a team of people working around the clock. There were days when I honestly thought the business might collapse under the weight of the orders and logistical nightmares. But I pushed through. I knew this was a temporary hurdle, and I refused to let it end now. We focused on pivoting even more, offering a wider range of products, like family packs, vegan meal kits, and even adding snacks to our delivery options. 3 years into the business, my small idea became something big. Our company grew exponentially. We went from being a small, local meal kit service to one of the top 5 health-focused meal delivery services in the country. I hired a team of talented individuals who helped me take the business to the next level. We expanded our delivery range and even partnered with gyms and fitness centers to offer custom meal plans for members. What's funny is that even now, years later, I still don't feel like the business is perfect. There are always new challenges to face, competitors to keep an eye on, and innovations to pursue. But when I look back on that moment, I decided to go for it. When I took that leap of faith without a safety net, it feels surreal. I think the most important lesson I've learned throughout this journey is that entrepreneurship isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being persistent, adaptable, and not being afraid to make mistakes. It's about showing up every single day and putting in the work, even when things don't seem to be going your way. I still can't believe that a random idea I had sitting on my couch, scrolling through social media, turned into a multi-million-dollar business. Sure, there were plenty of failures along the way, but those failures became stepping stones to success. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the constant pressure, those were all necessary parts of the process. Now, I look forward to the future, knowing that the journey is far from over. I had always dreamed of being my own boss, but like most people, I never thought it would actually happen. Growing up, I was the typical small-town kid, obsessed with technology but too scared to take big risks. I went to college with a safe, predictable career path in mind, accounting. I figured I could make good money, have job security, and live a relatively comfortable life. But deep down, I knew something was missing. After graduation, I landed a stable job at a well-known firm. The paycheck was decent, the benefits were solid, and the work wasn't too difficult. But there was a constant gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. I didn't want to be just another cog in the machine. I wanted to create something of my own, build it from the ground up, and see where it could take me. The problem was, I had no idea what that something would be. One evening, after a particularly soul-crushing day at the office, I stumbled across a Reddit post that would change my life. It was a story about a guy who had started an online business in his garage. The company was now worth millions, and he had built it without any prior experience in business. The post was long, detailed, and inspiring. He talked about the failures, the late nights, and the sacrifices. But most importantly, he made it sound possible. I remember reading it, thinking to myself, if he can do it, why can't I? The idea of starting my own business began to grow in my mind. But there was one big problem. I had zero experience. No background in entrepreneurship. No connections. No clue about how to even start. I couldn't just quit my job, at least, not yet. I had student loans to pay off, a rent check to cover, and no savings to fall back on. But I knew I had to start somewhere. I spent the next few months researching. I devoured articles, podcasts, books, anything I could find about starting a business. I stumbled across a niche I thought might work: eco-friendly products. People were becoming more conscious about sustainability, and I saw a growing market for sustainable goods. But the challenge was figuring out how to enter the space. I started small. I didn't have thousands of dollars to invest in inventory, so I used dropshipping. I set up an online store through Shopify, built a basic website, and focused on creating a brand that resonated with environmentally conscious consumers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I spent my evenings after work learning how to market my products, testing ads, and tweaking my website. I still remember the rush I felt the first time I saw a sale come through, $12.99 for a bamboo toothbrush. It was small, but it was proof that my idea could work. The first few months were brutal. I had to juggle my full-time job and my side hustle, and the business wasn't exactly booming. I was making a few sales here and there, but it wasn't enough to quit my job. Still, I kept pushing forward. I learned the importance of SEO, social media marketing, and creating content that resonated with my target audience. Slowly, my website traffic began to grow, and so did my sales. Then came the turning point. One day, I received an email from a large eco-friendly influencer who had stumbled across my website. She loved my products and wanted to collaborate on a sponsored post. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't making much money, but this was the kind of exposure that could take my business to the next level. I worked out a deal with her, and her post about my products went live. The result? Sales skyrocketed. I went from selling a handful of items each week to dozens every day. I was hooked. But with success came new challenges. I needed to scale. I had to find suppliers, manage customer service, and figure out how to keep up with demand. I also had to deal with the mental strain. My full-time job was becoming increasingly harder to balance with the growing business. I was working late nights, early mornings, and weekends. I barely had time to breathe. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. I felt like I was on the brink of something huge. 6 months after that influencer's post, I had saved up enough money to take the plunge. I quit my job. It was terrifying. I didn't have a big cushion of savings, and there was still so much I didn't know. But I had reached a point where the business was making enough money to sustain itself. And I knew that if I didn't go all in now, I would always wonder what might have been. The first few months of being a full-time entrepreneur were chaotic. I moved my operations from my apartment to a small office space, hired a couple of employees to help with customer service and fulfillment, and worked tirelessly to grow the brand. But the hard work began to pay off. My business was growing faster than I ever thought possible. I reinvested everything I made back into the company, constantly testing new marketing strategies, improving my products, and expanding my product line. Then, about a year into my new venture, I hit another breakthrough. I had been building my email list from day one, offering discounts and free resources in exchange for subscribers. One day, I decided to send out an exclusive email to my list announcing a new product line. I offered a limited-time discount, and to my surprise, sales were through the roof. I realized that having a loyal customer base was one of the most valuable assets I could have. These customers were not just buying products. They were advocates for my brand. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I faced plenty of obstacles along the way. My suppliers occasionally messed up orders. There were shipping delays. My marketing campaigns didn't always work. There were moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But I refused to give up. I kept learning, adapting, and adjusting. Every failure was just a lesson in disguise. Today, 3 years later, my business is thriving. We've expanded our product line to include everything from reusable shopping bags to sustainable skincare. We're in multiple retail stores, and our online presence is stronger than ever. I've been able to hire a small team that shares my passion for sustainability, and we're constantly coming up with new ideas to push the brand forward. Most importantly, I wake up every day excited to work. I don't dread the thought of going into the office anymore. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were so many moments when I thought about quitting, when I thought it would never work, when I felt overwhelmed. But if I had given up then, I wouldn't be where I am now. My business isn't just a success. It's a testament to the power of persistence, hard work, and taking that leap of faith. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, let me tell you something. It won't be easy. It will test you in ways you never imagined. But if you keep pushing, keep learning, and keep adapting, there's a good chance you'll make it. The most important step is the first one, taking the leap. If I can do it, you can too. I always thought that entrepreneurship was for people who had a vision or a revolutionary idea. The kind of people who could wake up one day, think of something nobody else had, and build an empire. I wasn't that person. At least, not at first. I grew up in a small town where most people worked 9-to-5 jobs, and the idea of making it big seemed like a fantasy. My parents were both teachers, and we lived modestly, but I was always driven to do something more than just scrape by. The problem was, I didn't have any groundbreaking ideas. I didn't have some epic plan to change the world. What I did have was an overwhelming sense that I didn't want to live the same life that most people I knew were living. When I turned 21, I left home and moved to the city to attend university. It was here, in the bustle of student life, that I started to realize how much I enjoyed the concept of business, even if I didn't have any real idea of how to make one. I majored in economics, hoping to learn the ropes of finance and maybe one day get into a corporate job. But as I dug deeper into my studies, I began to feel that the corporate world wasn't my destiny either. Something about the structure, the hierarchy, the endless grind just didn't sit well with me. After finishing my degree, I worked for a few months in a marketing firm to pay the bills. The work was fine, decent pay, standard hours, but I quickly realized that I was working for someone else's dream. That's when the idea of building something for myself started to take root. It wasn't a light bulb moment or a sudden epiphany. It was a slow, nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. I wanted to create something. I wanted to own something. The trouble was, I didn't know what. I looked around for inspiration, trying to figure out what business I could start. But nothing felt right. I wasn't passionate about any one thing enough to commit to it, and I didn't have a special talent or skill that could set me apart. I was a jack of all trades, master of none. One night, after a few too many drinks with friends, I had a conversation that would change everything. We were talking about random things, as people often do when they're a little tipsy, and somehow, the topic of meal delivery services came up. A friend of mine mentioned that she always struggled to find healthy, affordable meal options that actually tasted good. She didn't have time to cook, and she didn't want to eat junk food. That was the moment the seed was planted in my mind. I thought, what if I could create a meal delivery service that wasn't just about delivering food, but about delivering healthy, well-balanced meals for busy people who didn't have the time or knowledge to cook? It wasn't some game-changing concept, but it was a gap in the market that I saw, and more importantly, it was something I could execute. I spent the next few weeks doing research, reading everything I could about meal delivery, nutrition, and food logistics. I realized that I didn't need to create some out-of-this-world concept to start a business. I just needed to solve a problem that a lot of people had. After all, at the core of every successful business is a solution to a problem. So, I decided to take the plunge. I started with a small budget, essentially scraping together whatever I had saved from my marketing job, and began looking for a kitchen to rent. I also started talking to local suppliers and chefs. The logistics of it all felt overwhelming at first, but slowly, I began to put everything together. I hired a small team of chefs who shared my vision and passion for healthy, quick meals. I didn't have much experience in the kitchen, but I was determined to learn. My first few weeks were a disaster. I hadn't fully understood the complexities of running a food business. We struggled with sourcing ingredients, figuring out delivery logistics, and ensuring the meals were both affordable and of good quality. I received complaints, many of them. Some customers didn't like the taste of the food, others said the portions were too small, and there was always the issue of timing. Getting the meals delivered on time was a constant struggle. But here's the thing, I didn't give up. I could have thrown in the towel at any point, but the idea of quitting felt worse than the failure itself. I worked 12 to 14-hour days, analyzing every mistake, trying to improve little by little. I listened to the feedback, refined the meals, improved the packaging, and worked out the kinks in the delivery system. Then, about 3 months in, something clicked. Our meals started to get better, the feedback improved, and word of mouth spread. People were talking about our service, and we were gaining traction. I'll never forget the first day I got a genuine compliment from a customer. It was like the weight of all the sleepless nights and failed attempts suddenly felt worth it. As time went on, the business grew. We expanded our menu options, hired more staff, and started building a brand around health and convenience. I focused on making the business as customer-centric as possible, always making sure that our meals weren't just about feeding people, but about improving their lives. We introduced meal plans, subscription options, and a loyalty program that rewarded repeat customers. We also partnered with local gyms and wellness centers, which helped us tap into a community that valued both health and convenience. Over the next few years, the business evolved from a tiny kitchen operation to a full-fledged company with multiple delivery hubs. We started offering nationwide delivery, and our meals were featured in a number of health and wellness magazines. Revenue skyrocketed. We were profitable, and I was finally doing something that I was truly passionate about. Looking back, it's almost surreal how far we've come. What started as a small idea with a tiny budget turned into a multi-million-dollar business. But what's even more incredible is that I didn't do it by having some big, original idea. I did it by seeing a need in the market and executing it as best as I could. It was about persistence, learning from failures, and not being afraid to take risks. To this day, I can't believe how much I've grown from that naive, unsure person I was back then. And while the financial success has been rewarding, what really keeps me going is knowing that I've created something that helps people. Every time I get an email from a customer saying our meals have helped them live a healthier life, it makes everything worthwhile. I may not have been a visionary when I started, but I learned that success isn't always about having a groundbreaking idea. It's about recognizing an opportunity, working hard, and never giving up. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.